I want to share with you guys a little bit of how I got into the field of journalism, because it is so daunting. And I knew I always wanted to be a journalist, but when you don't have anything on your CV except for maybe a couple articles at the Eagle, it's really difficult to get anybody, to listen to you. So my first job out of college was actually in Afghanistan. Professor Gentile had introduced me to Reza Dagati, who is a journalist for National Geographic, a photojournalist. And I ended up going to Afghanistan, to Kabul, and worked in development. I was working with an organization called INA that in 2001, 2002, 2003, after the Taliban fell, was really effective at training Afghani journalists in the field. I'm not sure what they're doing now, but for me, it was an opportunity to get into Afghanistan and to understand what's going on the grassroots level in the field. So I went to Afghanistan, but this was 2006. I went alone, I was 22, had no security, no help. I would absolutely not recommend to do that now. Do not go to Afghanistan unless you have a plan, unless you have security, unless you have people that are going to watch your back. 2006, it was dangerous, but certainly not as dangerous as it is now. So anyways, the reason I mention Afghanistan is it really gave me a confidence that, okay, if I can literally survive this experience, I'm going to be ready for the next experience. But it also taught me one thing, which is you should never go into a situation because you want to be a hero or because you think it's cool you're going into a conflict area. Because it's very likely that somebody will die getting you out. So I think that if you're going to go to a place like Afghanistan or Pakistan, you better have a good reason and a plan. And that I learned probably from mistakes I made in Afghanistan, of just being in situations I probably shouldn't have gotten myself into. And if I'd had more foresight, I could have avoided. From Afghanistan, I had this fellowship that took me to India for a year. And while I was working in India, I was actually working in development with climate change refugees in slums, terrible job, couldn't stand getting up every morning. Just because I didn't see that it was really productive. Like, I kind of knew that the things that this particular NGO was doing wasn't going to be sustainable in the future. But what I did on this fellowship was I saved money. And this is something that's really important, and that's why the next point I want to make is about money, is you really need some money in the bank to get started with this. So when I actually started as a freelance journalist, I had saved about $10,000. And I had saved that money because when I was living in India, my rent was $100 a month. And I was living in a basati, which is like the servants' quarters in a middle-class Indian neighborhood, without AC. If you ever live in India, spend money and get an AC. It was a terrible, terrible mistake. But Professor Gentile asked me the other day, are you safe? Like, are you safe where you're choosing to live in India? And the answer is yes. I was very safe, and I was in a good community, and literally within a neighborhood of Indians who watched out for me because I was the only foreigner in the neighborhood. But that is how I saved my money. Instead of blowing it on a really nice place to live that would cost $800 a month, I was saving tons of money on just my rent. But the way I found out about those things is before I went to India, I researched. I got in touch with people on the ground. I found out what are people paying for rent. I just learned about the environment of the place, very much like Gentile teaches in his backpack journalism class before I actually got to the ground.